Olivia Bennett signed the papers with trembling hands, the pen feeling heavier than it should. 5 years. No love, no intimacy, no future beyond the contract. Just enough time to save her family's vineyard from bankruptcy and give Richard Blackwood the respectable wife image his board demanded. At 22, she had never imagined her wedding would take place in a lawyer's office with only witnesses and signatures. Richard sat across from her, impeccably dressed in his charcoal suit, reviewing the terms one final time. At 38, he was Wall Street's most feared CEO, known for his calculated moves and emotional detachment. "You understand the arrangement?" he said without looking up. "Public appearances as needed. Separate living quarters. No personal involvement." Olivia nodded, thinking of her father's grave and her mother's tears over the mounting debts. "I understand." The marriage ceremony was equally clinical. A judge, 2 witnesses, a photographer for the press announcement. The platinum band onto her finger. His touch was brief and cold. No kiss sealed their union, just a handshake and a formal Mrs. Blackwood. The Blackwood estate overwhelmed her with its marble halls and crystal chandeliers. At her designated wing felt more like a luxury hotel than a home. That evening, she dined alone in her suite, staring at the ring that felt like a beautiful shackle. At midnight, she stood by her bedroom window in a simple white nightgown, breathing in the jasmine-scented air. Tomorrow, she would begin her role as Richard Blackwood's wife. Tonight, she mourned the dreams she had sacrificed. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned, expecting the housekeeper, but Richard stood in her doorway. He had loosened his tie, and something in his steel-gray eyes looked almost uncertain. "I wanted to ensure you were comfortable," he said, stepping inside uninvited. "Thank you. Everything is perfect." He moved closer, studying her face in the moonlight. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," she whispered. The space between them seemed to pulse with unspoken questions. He reached out, his fingertips barely grazing her cheek. "This changes nothing," he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Of course not," she agreed, even as her heart began to race. When he leaned down and kissed her, soft and searching, Olivia knew their carefully constructed contract had just encountered its first crack. Olivia woke to empty sheets and the scent of Richard's cologne lingering on her pillow. The morning sun streamed through the windows, but he was gone. By the time she dressed and made her way downstairs, his assistant informed her that Mr. Blackwood had left for an emergency board meeting in Tokyo. For 3 weeks, he stayed away. During his absence, Olivia threw herself into learning her new role. She attended charity luncheons, posed for magazine features, and smiled graciously at everyone who commented on her whirlwind romance with the notorious bachelor. Each lie felt like swallowing glass. The press loved the story of the vineyard heiress who had captured the heart of Wall Street's Iceman. They didn't know about the contract, the separate bedrooms, or the way she spent her evenings alone, replaying that single kiss that had felt more real than anything in her life. When Richard finally returned, he was different, colder, more distant than before. He nodded politely at dinner, discussed her upcoming appearances with clinical precision, and retired to his wing without so much as a glance in her direction. 2 months passed this way. Olivia began to wonder if she had imagined the tenderness in his touch, the vulnerability in his eyes that first night. Then came the Whitmore Foundation Gala, their first major public appearance together. Olivia wore a stunning emerald gown that complemented her auburn hair, and when Richard saw her descending the staircase, something flickered in his expression before he quickly masked it. "You look appropriate," he said, offering his arm. The gala, they played their parts perfectly. Richard's hand rested possessively on her lower back as they mingled with New York's elite. They danced once, moving together with practiced elegance, but when their eyes met, the pretense felt suffocating. During dinner, Charlotte Whitmore, a socialite known for her sharp tongue, leaned across the table with a predatory smile. "How refreshing to see Richard so domesticated," she purred. "Though I must say, dear, you seem rather sad for a newlywed. Trouble in paradise already?" The table fell silent. Olivia felt every eye upon her, waiting for her response. Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Olivia smiled serenely and took Richard's hand. Not sad, Charlotte, just overwhelmed by how fortunate I am. When you find someone who sees you completely, who accepts every part of you, it can be quite humbling. Her words were meant as performance, but as she spoke them, looking directly at Richard, something shifted in the air between them. His fingers tightened around hers, and for a moment the contract felt likely, and her words felt like the truth. Later that night, as they rode home in silence, Richard finally spoke. That was well handled, thank you. He turned to study her profile. In the passing streetlights. Did you mean it? What you said about being seen completely? Olivia's breath caught. Did you want me to mean it? He didn't answer. But when they arrived home, he walked her to her door and hesitated. Good night, Olivia, he said softly. Her name sounding different on his lips than it had in months. As she closed her door, she heard his footsteps pause in the hallway, then continue to his own wing. Neither of them slept well that night, both wondering what would happen if they stopped. Pretending their hearts weren't involved, spring arrived with an unexpected invitation. Richard's grandmother, the formidable Eleanor Blackwood, requested their presence at her estate in Martha's Vineyard for her 80th birthday celebration. It would be their first time meeting family, and their first weekend alone together since their wedding night. She's quite perceptive, Richard warned as they drove through the New England countryside. She'll see right through any pretense. Olivia watched the landscape blur past. Then perhaps we shouldn't pretend. He glanced at her sharply but said nothing. Eleanor Blackwood was elegant and sharp-eyed, greeting them at her sprawling coastal home with the bearing of old aristocracy. She embraced Olivia warmly and studied Richard with knowing eyes. So this is the girl who finally melted my grandson's heart, she said, linking arms with Olivia. I was beginning to think it was made of stone. That evening at dinner, Eleanor regaled them with stories of Richard's childhood, painting a picture of a lonely boy who had learned early to guard his emotions. Olivia found herself stealing glances at her husband, seeing him in a new light. Was 7 when his parents died in that car accident, Eleanor said quietly. Came to live with me, didn't speak for months. I worried I'd never see him smile again. Richard's jaw tightened. Grandmother, oh hush. Olivia should know these things. Eleanor turned to her. You spent 30 years building walls, dear. You seemed to be the first person brave enough to try climbing them. Later, they walked along the moonlit beach. The salt air was cool, and Olivia pulled her wrap closer around her shoulders. Without thinking, Richard moved behind her, his arms encircling her waist, sharing his warmth. They stood like that, her back against his chest, watching the waves. She's right, you know, Olivia said softly. About the walls. They've served me well, have they? Or have they just kept you lonely? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his arms tightened around her. I don't know how to do this, Olivia. How to be what you deserve. She turned in his arms, looking up at his shadowed face. You don't have to be anything but yourself. Not the CEO, not the Iceman, just Richard. When he kissed her this time, there was no hesitation. His hands tangled in her hair, and she pressed closer, tasting salt air and something deeper, something that felt like coming home. They made love on the beach beneath the stars. And afterward, wrapped in his jacket, Olivia felt something she hadn't dared hope for. The next morning, Eleanor pulled Olivia aside while Richard was on a business call. That boy loves you, she said simply. Probably doesn't know it yet, stubborn as he is. But I see the way he looks at you when you're not watching. Like you're the answer to a question he forgot he'd been asking. We have an arrangement, Olivia said carefully. Eleanor waved dismissively. Arrangements are for businesses. What you two have is far more dangerous. She smiled, and far more beautiful. On the drive home, Richard was quieter than usual.
Finally.
Olivia couldn't stand the silence. You regretting last night? He pulled the car over so abruptly she gasped. Before she could ask what was wrong, he was kissing her again, desperate and searching. I'm terrified, he admitted against her lips. I'm terrified because I don't want this to end in 2.5 years. I don't want this to end at all. Olivia's heart soared even as a chill ran down her spine, because she knew, as surely as she knew her own name, that love this powerful would either save them both or destroy everything they'd built. The photograph appeared in the New York Herald on a Tuesday morning, splashed across the business section with the headline, "Blackwood Empire Built on Lies." The image showed Richard and Olivia at a restaurant 6 months earlier, their body language, formal and distant, with an inset of their contract marriage document, somehow leaked to the press. Olivia found Richard in his study, the newspaper crumpled in his fist, his face pale with fury. "How did they get this?" she whispered. "Someone on my board? Someone who wants me gone." His voice was deadly quiet. "The shareholders are calling for an emergency meeting. They're saying I've been manipulating the markets with false information." The next days blurred together in a nightmare of legal meetings, press statements, and emergency damage control. The board of directors convened, their faces grim as they discussed Richard's future with the company he'd built from nothing. The marriage was a business arrangement, Thomas Whitmore, Charlotte's husband and the board's senior member, declared. "It calls into question every decision you've made, every statement about your personal life. How can we trust you with our company?" Richard sat at the head of the conference table, his composure perfect despite the storm raging around him. "My private arrangements have no bearing on my professional capabilities." "Your wife is a stranger to you," another board member interjected, "yet you've presented her as your devoted partner." "It's fraud, Richard. Pure and simple." Olivia watched through the glass partition, her heart breaking as she saw Richard fighting for everything he'd worked for. She thought of Eleanor's words about love being dangerous, and suddenly she knew what she had to do. She pushed through the conference room doors before anyone could stop her. "You're wrong," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. Every head turned to her, including Richard's, his eyes widening in alarm. "Mrs. Blackwood, this is a private meeting," Thomas said coldly. "A meeting about my marriage. I believe that gives me the right to speak." She moved to stand beside Richard's chair, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You want the truth? Here it is." Richard started to rise. "Olivia, don't." She pressed him back down, her fingers squeezing gently. "The contract exists. Yes. We married for practical reasons. But if you think that means we don't know each other, you're mistaken." She looked around the room, meeting each skeptical gaze. "I know that Richard drinks his coffee black because he says life is bitter enough without adding sweetness he doesn't deserve. I know he calls his grandmother every Sunday at exactly 3 o'clock because she raised him when his parents died, and he's terrified of losing anyone else he loves. I know he keeps a photograph of his parents in his desk drawer and looks at it when he thinks no one is watching." Richard's hand found hers, squeezing tightly. "I know he works 18-hour days, not because he's greedy, but because this company employs 12,000 people, and he feels responsible for every one of their families. I know he donated $10 million anonymously to children's charities last year because he remembers what it feels like to be powerless and alone." Her voice grew stronger. "And I know he loves me, even though he spent his whole life believing love is a weakness he can't afford. So yes, we married for business. But we fell in love because we're human beings who found something in each other we didn't know we were missing." The room was silent. Thomas Whitmore's expression had shifted from skepticism to something approaching respect. "You could have stayed silent," he said finally. "Kept your privacy. Why risk it?" Olivia looked down at Richard, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Some things are worth fighting for." The vote was close, but Richard kept his position as CEO that night. As they finally returned home, he pulled Olivia into his arms in the foyer of their estate. "You saved me," he whispered against her hair. "Oh no," she said, framing his face with her hands. "We saved each other." When he kissed her, it tasted like freedom, like a future they were finally brave enough to claim. But in the shadows outside, Thomas Whitmore sat in his car, making a phone call that would change everything. "The wife is the weak link," he said quietly. "If we can't destroy Richard through business, we'll destroy him through his heart." The accident happened 3 weeks later on a rainy Thursday evening. Olivia was driving home from a charity meeting when her car skidded on the wet pavement and crashed into a tree. She woke up in the hospital with Richard holding her hand, his face haggard with worry and guilt. The brakes failed. the police investigator explained quietly to Richard while Olivia slept. Someone cut the brake line. This wasn't an accident. Richard's world tilted. Someone had tried to kill his wife to hurt him. The realization hit him like a physical blow, followed immediately by another thought that stopped his breath. She wasn't just his wife anymore. She was everything. When Olivia woke again, she found Richard slumped in the chair beside her bed, still wearing his blood-stained shirt from rushing to the hospital. "Hey," she whispered, her voice hoarse. His head snapped. Up, and she saw raw fear in his eyes, quickly replaced by relief so profound it made her chest ache. "Don't you ever scare me like that again?" he said roughly, leaning forward to kiss her forehead. "Someone tried to kill me," she said, the memory returning in fragments. "I know." His jaw tightened. "The FBI is investigating. Whoever did this, I'll find them, Richard." She reached for his hand. "I want out of the contract." His face went white. "Olivia, I know this is frightening, but we can protect you. I can keep you safe." "No, you don't understand." She struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in her ribs. "I want out of the contract because I don't want to be your wife for 5 years anymore." His heart shattered so completely he was surprised. He remained conscious. "I want to be your wife forever," she continued, watching understanding dawn in his eyes. "I want to marry you again, for real this time. No contracts, no conditions. Just love." The breath he'd been holding escaped in a rush. "Olivia, I love you, Richard Blackwood. Not your money, not your status, not what you can do for my family. I love the man who brings me coffee at midnight when I'm reading. Love the man who holds me when I have nightmares about my father. I love the man who's so afraid of losing people that he tries not to love them at all." He was kissing her before she finished speaking, tears he didn't know he'd been holding sliding down his cheeks. "I love you too," he whispered against her lips. "God, Olivia, I love you so much it terrifies me." The investigation revealed that Thomas Whitmore had orchestrated the attempt on Olivia's life, hoping to destroy Richard through grief. He was arrested and charged, his conspiracy unraveling under FBI scrutiny. 3 months later, on a beach in Martha's Vineyard with Eleanor beaming in the front row, Richard and Olivia renewed their vows. This time, when they kissed, it was witnessed by family and friends who knew their love story from its calculated beginning to its passionate truth. "Do you think we would have found each other anyway?" Olivia asked later as they danced at their reception, her white dress flowing around them in the ocean breeze. Richard considered this, spinning her slowly under the stars. "I don't know, but I'm grateful we didn't have to find out." She smiled, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "No more contracts?" "Just promises," he agreed, holding her closer. The kind of people make when they're planning to keep them forever. As they swayed together beneath the New England sky, the original contract that had brought them together was nothing but ashes in Eleanor's fireplace, replaced by something infinitely more binding. 2 hearts that had learned, against all odds, how to love without conditions. Asterisk, the end. Asterisk, asterisk. Like this video if the story touched your heart. Subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love. And let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.